Works for me, boss.
Copy. Okay.
And we're live.
Hi, everybody. Hildie McQueen here. Welcome to the ever-changing face of romance and writing in different genres. So today I am joined by a talented group of authors. And I do want to tell you, though, that we are friends in real life. So if we joke on each other or kid around, then you'll know that that's because we are good friends. So today it's a beautiful sunny day here in Georgia, and I'm so excited because I am the moderator, and I've never done this before, so excuse me if I mess it up. Hopefully I won't. So let's get started. Let me introduce you to this wonderful panel of authors. So first of all, authors, start by introducing yourself. Tell us your pen name and what genres you write in, but do not elaborate yet. So just tell me your pen name, and if you want to introduce yourselves, that's fine. And then tell me what genres you write in. Let's start with Peggy. Let's start with Mary.
Hi, everybody. I am Mary Farmer, and guess what? That's my actual real name, too. I started out writing historical Westerns, and I currently write both Victorian and Regency, and also MM, which is gay romance. Oh, I did a couple of contemporaries, too. So that's me.
Okay, let's go with Carolyn. You're next, Caroline.
Hi, everybody. Caroline Lee here. I write sensual historical Westerns, sweet contemporary Westerns, and pretty spicy Highlanders.
Okay, Sylvia?
Hi, my name is Sylvia McDaniel. I write sensual Western historicals. I write sensual contemporaries. I write I've just started a pen name. I've got a multiple personality now under Lovey Lloyd, which is what I call my husband Lovey, and my maiden name Lloyd. And I write witches and paranormals with angels and aliens and everything else in it. So that's what I do.
Okay, JD, tell us about you.
Like Sylvia, I have multiple personalities. As JD, I write paranormal/fantasy romance. I write dragon shifters, and I also write urban fantasy. And then I have another pen name. It's not a secret, Jessica Hawk, and I write young adult paranormal as Jessica. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Peggy, tell us about yourself.
I am Peggy McKenzie. Peggy is actually my real name. McKenzie is my maiden name. I write primarily Western historicals. I have written some contemporary Western historicals, and I'm trying my hand at time travel Westerns under the name of Nikki Malone.
Now, see, that's something I didn't even know. And I'm Hildie McQueen, USA Today bestselling author of medieval Highlander romance. I write Western historicals or American historicals, and I also write under H.M. McQueen, and that pen name I write paranormals. So that is us. Now, the reason I didn't have them elaborate is because I want them to now go back and tell me why. Tell me your why for each of those genres. What made you pick the genre, and why did you choose a second one? So what made you pick that first genre, and then why did you pick a second one? So let's go back to Mary.
Okay, well, the funny thing is I always wanted to since I was like a kid, write Victorian Regency, like England-based romance. And I got into historical Westerns first completely by accident, and it all had to do with the time had an open spot all of a sudden in her calendar. She's like, do you have anything ready to go now? So I had a historical Western, so I sent that to her, published that, and ended up finding the Pioneer Hearts Facebook group. So most of these other wonderful ladies, we all met through the Pioneer Hearts Facebook group. And it was a fun group of people. So for a couple years, I wrote historical Westerns because that's what my friends were doing. But ultimately, I always wanted to write Victorian romance. I have a degree in history, And I specifically studied 19th century England, especially the late Victorian era. So that's why I got into doing that, because that's the area of my expertise. From there I have gotten into doing gay romance, just because anyone who knows me knows that I love gay men, which is a whole other can of worms that I won't open right now. But then I've done a couple of contemporaries as well, but those were sort of offshoot projects that I was invited to write with people. And they were a lot of fun, but that's not where my passion is. But yeah, so I'm finally doing the thing that I wanted to do all along, which was Victorian romance. It's awesome.
That is awesome. Okay, Carolyn, so tell us the why for each genre, and why did you pick a second genre?
I was busy listening to Mary, and I forgot that I was supposed to be thinking of my own. I guess honestly, it was a similar story to Mary in that my first history degree was in medieval European history. I started reading medieval romances when I was like in the 3rd and 4th grade, and just that's what triggered my love of history. My very first books that I wrote were in the medieval subgenre. They will never see the light of day. But like that was always there. And then I answered a call from Harlequin to write. They were looking for a very specific book story, and I wrote it. It was a Christmas story, and I submitted it, and it was not accepted. And I thought, well, this is a pretty good story. It was a historical Western. So I said, well, I'm just going to publish it and see what happens. And I did. And it was very popular. So I wrote the next one and the next one, and it continued. Like Mary, I discovered a real love for Victorian. So I know her idea of Victorian is Victorian Britain. To me, the Westerns that we write are still the Victorian period. They're just different kinds of Victorians. I 2 years ago decided to make the switch to medieval Scottish, just because I've always had that love there. I am continuing to publish both. Sort of, I guess it's been about 6 months since I published a Western, a historical Western. But I didn't. Leave that behind. I'm being contemporary. I write, even though my brand is history with heart, I like contemporaries because I think that they are a good palate cleanser for my brain. And I know a lot of historical authors who feel the same way. They're fun to write.
Awesome. Okay, so Sylvia, tell us about each genre that you write in and your why for each of those genres.
Well, I started out writing for Kensington, and I wrote historical Westerns, and I loved writing historical Westerns. They're probably my favorite. But now I also wrote some Victorian. I love American history, but there never seems to be that much interest in the American history as much as there is in the Westerns. I mean, not when I say I was writing books in New Orleans, set in New Orleans. And then I went back to Westerns, and I love my Westerns. I wrote those. Then I wrote some contemporaries just because I had this idea about a town called Cupid, Texas, where people like to run around a statue at midnight naked, and the first person they see is their true love. And that has been, to me, that's my fun release. So once a year, I write this fun release kind of book. Recently, I've gotten into this paranormal, and it's been quite interesting because I've gotten to explore new avenues with characters I didn't exactly ever think I would write about, which are demons and angels and witches and aliens. I just have them all in there, but they're fun. And it's also kind of turned into a little bit of a save the world and also a little bit of a murder mystery. So I'm exploring new avenues. I get tired of writing just one particular genre, so then I'm switching over, and it's almost like it cleanses your palate, and then you go, oh, I got to write another Western historical. And so I'm really looking forward to this fall writing another Western historical.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, JD, tell us about your different genres and your why for each of them.
All right, cool. Well, I'm a little bit of a black sheep in this group. I've never written historical romance. And I have such, I know, because the police. No, but I have such respect for people who can write historical because there's so much research and just factual stuff. Like I write fantasy and paranormal because I can kind of make it up. But now I started out, so actually my first writing love is like high epic fantasy. I grew up reading a lot. I read a lot of like your what now would be like CW. In fact, like I read L.J. Smith and I read Christopher Pike and R.L. Stine and all of that when I was younger. So I always kind of had a love for YA, but then I started reading like epic fantasy, like R.A. Salvatore when I was younger. So I started my very first book, like Carolyn, will never see the light of day, but it was high fantasy. And then I fell in love with urban fantasy and I was like, that's what I want to write. And my first book I ever tried to get published was an urban fantasy series, but I didn't really know that it wasn't quite to market, I guess. So I had kept writing and I just kind of out of nowhere wrote a YA paranormal series, or the first book of one, and was like, I'll just see, and ended up getting published with a small press, which was an interesting story, but ultimately got there. Hildie knows. But I'm sure lots of people have a story like that. But anyway, I got the rights back and continued to write the series. And then in the meantime, I was like, hey, what if the show Supernatural, I don't know if anybody that's watching is a Supernatural fan. I'm like, what if this was about two women from the South instead of two brothers from Kansas? So I wrote this like kick-ass urban fantasy series. And then I was like, I wonder if dragon shifters are a thing. It was kind of a random, there was supposed to be a shifter box set. I didn't end up being involved with it, but I had gotten the idea, like, could I write shifter romance? I don't know. And then I found out dragon shifters were a thing and I love dragons. So I got to kind of combine that love of high fantasy and world building with the romance side. I learned over the course of 11 books in the series that writing romance is a lot harder than I thought it was. And somewhere in there, I also wrote one contemporary for like a group project. And I have, again, such mad respect for people who can do contemporary. I'm like, how do you have conflict when nobody's trying to kill each other? Like I just, my stories, people are trying to kill each other or take over the world or, yeah. And so it's mad props to those folks. But yeah, so I guess the why was, the dragon shifter thing was kind of a whim, just like, could I write a shifter romance? And then I was like, this is really fun. Like I just had so much fun with it. As the series went on, I just kind of kept writing and then it ended and I was like, well, I want to write more of these. So, but I still also love YA. There's something that's really fun about YA. It kind of, we were talking about this recently. It kind of crosses genres a little. It's, YA is more of an age category than a genre. So, and I've also enjoyed that. There's so much fun about like those characters who are finding their place in the world and like finding their identity in a way that you don't often, sometimes you do in adult work, but I think it's really fun that everything's new, everything's exciting and intense in YA. So that's why I still continue to write it. So that's my whys and X's and Z's and everything in between. Sorry, I rambled for a while.
That is fine. Okay, so Peggy, tell us about your different genres that you picked and your why.
Well, my genres was the Western historicals. I have a few contemporary historicals, and I'm trying the Western time travel. The reason why I like Westerns is because, one, I love cowboys. We used to rodeo. My husband and I used to team rope and barrel race. And so we've been around cowboys for a long time. And it's not just the people, it's kind of a way of life. They say, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. They're most of them are still fairly honorable. A handshake is as good as a piece of, a signature on the page. So it's just that way of life, the West, Lonesome Dove, just all the stuff that comes with that Western era. I write the contemporary Western because that's the only place I really put comedy in. I try to write funny. And so those are, they're still cowboys. There's still all the, you know, stuff that goes with it. But I try to put a little humor in those. And then the time travel, you know, they start out contemporary, but I always have them go back to the West. And the reason why I picked that was, I don't know if you've ever read, it's actually by Edgar Rice Burroughs, who wrote Tarzan, but he also wrote John Carter Goes to Mars. And it's the book, it's about, you know, 7 inches thick, and they've made a movie out of it, which is good. But the book is always, you know, books are always still the best. And I just fell in love with that whole concept of, oh my gosh, how did that happen? You know, and I'm a hard one to suspend belief, but he made me a believer that a cowboy from 1800s could actually be transported to Mars. And so I just loved it. And I said, I really want to try my hand at that. So that's my story.
Very good story, everybody. So, as far as I'm concerned, I write in mainly 2 genres, but then there's a third. I do the historical westerns, and those kind of happen. I kind of fell into the Western world. I started off originally writing paranormal because that is what I love to read. It's my first love. I love making up worlds, and like JD said, it's so much easier when the whole world is at stake and you can make your own rules. You don't have to research rules because you're making it yourself. So that's what made it but it was my favorite genre, and that's where I started off with. It's writing the Immortal Protector series, which is still under my pen name H.M. McQueen. And then I started stumbled into westerns. Like I said, it was quite a story that came to me. I had to write it. I fell in love with it, and then after that, I just, you know, after completing all this research, I loved the Western world. I grew up on Bonanza and Wild West and Wood Rifleman and all those shows. I'm dating myself, even though I'm only 35, and so that made me fall in love with the Western world. So I started writing that. Now, medieval Scotland. The reason for that is because I fell in love with the country. I love the history of Scotland. My maiden name, my real maiden name is I can't figure out where it's from, so I chose Scotland. It's McTair. And so when I went to Scotland and got to know people and was searching out my roots and stuff like that, it was just so cool. The people were amazing, the country, the history, the castles, everything. I just had to. Oh, and the men, consummate flirts, but respectful. So I had to delve deeper into Scotland and write more about Scotland. So now that is my jam. So that's the next question is a little bit more, I would say. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
I don't know if we're allowed to just jump in and say things. Okay. One of the things that I think is interesting that I've heard from everybody or a sort of hinted at is that we each write in different genres, and we have different stories that we tell in the different genres. And I think, I mean, I'm getting nods here. I think that's, and as an author, there's a benefit to that. You know, when you wake up and you've just had the best dream and you're like, oh my gosh, that would be great for historical cowboys. Or in my case, I do like Peggy with the humor in the contemporaries, and now in some of my historicals. But like when you have a really great conversation with somebody and you're like, that's going in a book, but I can't put that in one of my historical westerns or one of my Highlanders, so I'm going to put that in such and such. And I think maybe it was JD that said it, but we have ideas that work in different genres, and that's one of the benefits of writing in so many different genres. I think all of us have 3 or so that we were mentioning, because you can say, ooh, I want to put that in the next such and such book.
You're right. That's a good observation. All right, so this one is a little bit more for, I would say, the writers in the audience. The standard advice about writing romance is to pick one subgenre and stick to it. Do you guys think it still holds true today? That this is advice that has been given for years, so pick one subgenre and stick to it. Do you guys think it still holds true, or has that changed? Go ahead and start, Carolyn, since you're already on, girl.
Okay, I can't say that it's not true. I mean, I know authors that are writing in one subgenre and are doing very well. They're very successful in that subgenre. And I'm not going to name names, but people who only publish in particular things, and that's their brand now. I think that I have found more success by branching off. I've been able to expand my audience. And for me, it was a fairly significant steps. All three of my genres are very different. But it was successful for me to be able to expand my audience. It was also successful for me in terms of mental health, I suppose, like we just talked about. I could no longer only write in one genre because I was having so many ideas that fit into other genres. So I would say for me, it's been a tremendous success, but I am not going to say it's the only way.
Right. Okay, so Mary, I know you have something, hopefully, to say about this.
Oh, yeah. I have tons to say about
It's
this.
your question.
It was my question. I think it really depends on so many different factors. My quick and dirty answer is I don't think that advice holds true anymore, because the market changes so fast since the advent of e-publishing, and it's because it's so doable to switch on a dime and change subgenres and write different things. One day historical westerns are selling great, the next day they're not selling at all. The next day, shapeshifter romance is up, and the next day it's vampires. So I think it is important to be able to write different things, because as the title of this entire panel today, The Changing Face of Romance, it's ever changing, and we need to be able to keep up with that. But that being said, if you're starting a career, if you're just starting out from the beginning, I really think you need to establish yourself in one subgenre before you can move on to different ones. I think I had something like 25 historical westerns published before I switched over into Victorian and Regency, because you do need to gain that audience, and they need to become familiar with your work. And if you publish a shapeshifter and then historical romance and then a contemporary cop thing, and there's no continuity between them, it's just, you're not going to be very sticky. Readers aren't going to remember you. But way back in the very beginning, when I first started, knowing that I really wanted to do Victorian romance, but starting out with historical westerns, I modeled my career on Julie Garwood. Julie Garwood was my role model starting out, because she did historical westerns. I love her Roses series, but she also did Scottish, and she did all sorts of different things. But she established herself in one thing first. It's like this thing that they always say, their other writing advice that they always give people: you have to learn the rules before you can break them. And that's basically what we're doing. We've learned the rules so that we can break them. And I think at this particular juncture of the publishing industry, you have to be able to break the rules. You have to be willing to break the rules, because everything changes so fast. And even readers, I'm sure you guys know, because so much is being published all the time, that you can read 24 shapeshifter books and suddenly you just don't want to read another one. You just can't stand it. So you switch over to time travel or something. We need to, as writers, catch up to what you guys are doing as readers. And that's the key to having a successful career these days, I think, is we need to keep up with you instead of just trying to dictate what you're reading.
Awesome input. Okay, Sylvia, do you have something to say on the subject of whether or not to stick to one subgenre is better than to do multiple ones?
I think Mary hit it perfectly. You've got to establish yourself before you try to change genres. And I have looked at my money that I make, and my westerns and my contemporaries were evenly, almost perfectly even to the penny of what my sales were. And so I knew that I could write both historical westerns and also contemporaries and do all right. But I went to PenCon last year, and I noticed that a lot of younger women were picking up paranormal. Paranormal seemed to be the thing that everybody was buying and seemed to be such a hit. And I thought, I'm still back writing historical Westerns and even the contemporaries. And so I decided I wanted to branch out and do something different that hopefully readers would pick up and read. And it's so funny because JD mentioned when she talked about the paranormal world and building it and the things you face. I never thought that I would be writing a series about witches. And there's this, that they've got to close the gates of hell. Like seal is breaking and they've got to close. They've got to save the world from the gates of, not let the gates of hell open. And I'm like, where did this come from? And then I'm murdering people and I'm like, whoa, but it's been fun for me. And I'm hoping that the readers will find it fun. So yeah, I think to establish yourself first is what you've got to do. But then from there, hopefully your readers will come along on the journey with you to something different. And I know some of my older readers will not. And I'm even telling them that I'm not trying to hide that this is my new pen name. I want them to know. And if they don't want to read paranormal, that's okay. That's their choice. So,
but you're going to find new readers too.
Exactly.
That are going to come back and read your other stuff.
That's what I'm hoping. Yes. That's the perfect world scenario.
Well, can I say you bring up a really good point there, though, Sylvia, because I was really anxious when I switched over. Would my historical Western readers follow me to Victorian romance? And I'm kind of surprised that so many of you did. Thank you. But that's another thing that we have to just be aware of as we do these switches. Will our old established readers, or will our young established readers follow us into our new genres?
Our faithful readers.
There you go.
Peggy, what do you think about the JD? What do you think about the whole idea of whether or not it's best to stick to one subgenre, or does that still hold true?
Well, I can tell you I've learned a lot in the last few years by just sticking my foot in it. So I could tell you that at very least, the approach of what several of these ladies have said of establishing yourself, establishing sort of a baseline, whether that's in readership or these are the kinds of stories I tell, is really smart before you start genre hopping. Because the initial part of my publishing career looked like YA, adult urban fantasy, another YA, a contemporary romance, dragon shifter romance. That was like my first 5 books. And then there were a bunch of novellas in between that were not connected to any other things. So if anybody was like, hey, what does J.D. Monroe write? I didn't know either. Like, so at no point was I ever giving a reader a chance to like sink their teeth in and go, oh, she writes dragon shifter stories that have lots of action and adventure as well as really badass heroines and sexy dudes. Like, that's, I mean, now after finally getting my poop in his poop, like I feel like somebody could decide, oh, this is what she writes. But I would definitely say it's good advice, as they said, if you're going to genre hop, to establish yourself, whether that's with a series, a really strong series or whatever first, because if you're hopping around from the beginning, people don't know what to expect from you. And you can't get a group of readers that's consistent. Like you guys were saying, if you write, like what I did, if someone's like, well, I like contemporary destination romance, then the next 12 books I wrote wouldn't have been that. They've been like, well, I was here for that, like, so I would say, I think it's great to be able to switch, but establishing first is really important to make that switch successfully and not just flounder for several years like I did.
So that's the advice that you would give to somebody that's first starting, is find a genre that you really like.
Yeah, I would say, and I always, I know there's always the debate of writing to market, and I would say, find that sweet spot of what's selling and what you really like, and there's so much room for that. Like I would venture to say there's probably not a whole lot that you just couldn't possibly sell as an author. So yeah, I would say find something that you really like where you can stick to it for a series or whatever, and start building a readership. And then when you make those changes, to be something that's adjacent. Like if you were trying to go from, I don't know, historical Western to contemporary military thriller would probably be a pretty rough jump, but historical Western to contemporary Western, probably not so much. So I think something that's adjacent is also, or, romance to romance is probably still okay. But I think, yeah, establishing yourself in something you like so that you're not like, oh my gosh, I hate writing this so much, but I have to build the readers, because that's no good either.
Thank you. Peggy, so tell us, what do you think about the advice to pick one genre and stick to it? Do you think that works, or do you think that that doesn't hold true anymore?
Well, everyone really has a kernel of truth. I think you have to establish yourself in a particular genre, or people can't find you. That's what JD said. That's what Sylvia said. Mary and Carolyn both said that. So that's true. Otherwise, they don't really know what you write. And plus, it's very important to find your own identity, your own voice. And I really think that if you're hopping around, you're going to have a hard time finding that. You kind of have to find that zone that you're comfortable in. And if you don't like what you're writing, I'm wrapping up a series right now that I've been on for 3 years, and I'm just struggling to get those last pages out because I'm sick of it. Sick of it. But with that said, there's 4 of us here: Mary, Sylvia, myself, and Hildie. We collaborated on a series that started in the middle 1800s, and each one of us wrote a different generation until we got to present day. And there were no readers that bailed out on us from start to finish. They started in the early Western historicals. They kept on going through the Great Depression, which is the book I wrote. Mary wrote the Vietnam War. Sylvia wrote present day. It was kind of a novelty for me because, well, one, I got to write with fabulous authors that let me tag along on their coattails. But it was a learning curve too, and it showed me that people will follow a good story wherever that story takes place. And if you write a good story and you produce a good product, a good book, you can convince people to come along with you for the ride, I think. But initially, I think you need to stay with one genre just until you can, build up your fan base and then get a name for yourself and then fly, see where it goes.
Good advice, everybody. I'm not going to add anything to this because I think it's all been said. I have a question from one of the readers. Let me start off with Mary. The question is, who was your hardest character to write and why? And this is a question by Kimmy Diane Seeley.
Oh gosh, my hardest character to write. It's funny because I would say, on the one hand, the characters that I have absolutely nothing in common with are the hardest ones to write, and yet the ones who are most like me are also really hard to write because you're trying to get that truthiness into it. But honestly, and I know this sounds weird, but some of the characters in the contemporary books that I wrote have been the hardest to write because I just don't necessarily relate to the contemporary world like the same way I do to the historical world. I think I wrote a character who was a high-powered businesswoman type of character, and I worked in an office when I wrote it. And I was like, I don't get this at all. Yet I have no problem writing the eccentric Victorian goofballs because that's basically what I am. So, my character of Elaine Bond from my book May Mistakes is the closest I've come to an autobiographical character, and she's just a nutbag. So
awesome. Caroline, what was your hardest character to write and why?
I want to know what kind of nutbag. What kind of nut? Also, I agree that Mary is an eccentric Victorian goofball.
Well, like a cashew or something like that.
She's a peanut. I don't know. That's a tough question. And it's tempting to say pass, but because Mary had to go first there, I had a few extra seconds to think about it. So I'll blather on as long as possible to give everybody else thinking. No, I'm kidding. So one of the things you know that you're going to get when you read one of my books are Mary and I actually both talk a lot about diversities, and one of the things that my books involve is ableism diversity, I suppose. You're going to get people with different abilities. So I write a lot of my characters have physical disabilities, and of course this involves a lot of research, and we get into it, and then we get into the history of this treatments and whatever. But I would say the most interesting character I wrote was a character who was deaf. Now I have written, blind characters and characters who are missing limbs, but when I wrote the deaf book, or the book about the deaf character, I was surprised how often my characters rely on sound when I am describing a scene. So I'm doing a poor job explaining this, but when I'm writing the scenes from her point of view, to not be able to talk about sound at all was just interesting. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I can write a book where the person doesn't talk about what he's seeing, but it turns out that Caroline relies on sound a lot. So that was interesting to learn.
Okay, Sylvia, what was your hardest character to write and why? Kimmy wants to know.
I have a series about 3 women who all learn that they are married to the same man, and he's been murdered. And there's 3 books, and each woman's has a book. And the last one, the third girl, she was accused of the murder. And she was a tough character to write because she just came out depressing to me for some reason. Well, she was addicted to laudanum, for one thing, which was a huge thing back in the late 1800s. And I love this series because 3 women all married to the same man. And of course, he was not a good guy, but they all found happiness and love in each of their books. But in her book, it was hard to write somebody accused of murder, addicted to laudanum. And then her lawyer is the man who she falls in love with, who actually saves her life and helps her get everything back together. But it ended up being, to me, depressing. But yet she ended up being a very, very strong woman because she overcame everything and found love in the end. But this was supposed to be a funny series, and it did not turn out to be funny. I mean, so that was my
What was the reader's response to her? How did the readers respond to her versus the other characters?
They liked her. They really did, which I didn't. They did. They liked her, but I think because I was intimate, I felt like, with her, as far as I was in her mind and in her soul, and somebody being addicted to something is a struggle. And if I had to rewrite that book, she would not be addicted, but it was one of her coping mechanisms. Because, I mean, if you're married to somebody you don't love and you don't like, because she did not want to marry Gene, then she had to have a coping mechanism.
So what is the title? Go ahead, Mary.
Is this your Lipstick and Lead series?
No. This is the Cuvier women. And gosh, I can't, the title. 70 books. I don't remember.
Post it in the group.
I'll post it in the group.
Right. You may be wondering, this happens to authors all the time. What was that book that I wrote back then?
I can't even remember her name. And that's what's really sad. I think her name was Nicole, but I think about it. I know his name. His name was Gene, because he had to die on the first page. Boom.
Gene is dead. Oh gosh. Okay. JD, tell us what your hardest character to write and why.
Oh, okay. So I had all this time to think about it. I'm going to give you 2, and both were for similar reasons. So one of my biggest challenges writing a romance series was, there's romance has a little bit of a questionable history with some of the behavior of men. That things that like would have been totally cool in book, well, people accepted in their books, like in the 60s and 70s, like now you would be like, whoa! And so, unless it's a certain type of book. So I had the fourth book of my dragon series is Enemies to Lovers. And basically the hero captures the heroine. They try to kill each other the first time they meet, and he captures her. And I realized as I was writing it for the first draft, basically the way I originally wrote it was they let her get away so they could follow her. But it was a really stupid plan because I was trying to avoid him torturing her, basically. Because I was like, does not a romance make if he tortures her for the first half of the book. So I was like, that's not going to work. So that one was a real challenge because I wanted him to be competent and capable. He's this legendary war hero, basically. But I also didn't want him to be despicable and like create the situation where you're like, oh, you know, tortured this woman who, I mean, is the enemy. But like, so that was a challenge with making him make intelligent decisions without being an idiot. So I ended up having to rewrite half of that book. And then the other one was similar. I wrote a new book in this series. It's sort of a Beauty and the Beast thing where a dragon prince kidnaps a woman into their world. The hero is not the kidnapper. He started out that way. And I was like, again, he starts the book stalking this woman. Like, there's a good reason for it. But again, you'd read the book and be like, oh, yikes. That's a big yikes for me. So with that one, it was challenging throughout the book. Like, again, to make him sympathetic, but also to understand why he would let this situation continue. So that was really challenging because, you know, I wanted him to come off as this noble character without being like, oh, you're a skis bag who's keeping this woman here in a castle in another world. So I would say those were challenging. More, I guess, from the perspective of making the characters likable, because if it wasn't romance, you'd just be like, okay, whatever. It's just, you know, they don't have to be likable, but you kind of want everyone to fall in love with them. So those, I think, were the most challenging to me because they were doing some shady things that I didn't want them to be terrible. So.
Yeah, you didn't want them to get into, what was that, with that syndrome when people fall in love with their captor?
Exactly. And I had, at least in, I think maybe in both books, the heroine actually makes a reference to Stockholm. Like, she's like, okay, do I really like him? Or is this because I've been stuck in this castle for a week or something? Like, but she obviously really likes him. But yeah, it's tough though. I have, the Enemies to Lovers thing's really tough. So yeah, that was mine.
Okay. Peggy, tell us about your hardest character to write and why was it hard to write it? Him or her?
Well, my mind went to her immediately because she is the fourth book in my Brides of the Rio Grande series. And she's, throughout all the other books, she's kind of a wild child. You know, all these girls were orphans. They've struggled most of their life. And she uses her crusty exterior behavior as a defense mechanism. She doesn't want anybody to get too close. And she's really over the top. But she's been in love with the sheriff since book one. And so this is her book, and she's trying to figure out how to win the guy that she loves. But she has a hard time, even though she tries to be a lady, she still has problems overcoming her gut instinct of her behavior. And I just didn't want, she had to be over the top, but I didn't want her to be almost like a cartoon character where she was just ridiculous, everything she did. And so there was that fine line between having her act out and having her be vulnerable, if that makes sense. So that was probably my toughest character.
What's the title of this book?
It's called Charity, and the caption at the bottom, it says, "This is the story everyone's been waiting for. Crazy Charity is back." So you know, that was just her. She's crazy. I mean, that's just all you can say.
Are the rest of us thinking, why would Peggy have a hard time relating to her?
Hey, I just didn't want her to be a cartoon, okay?
Okay, so let me talk about my hardest character to write, and it's not because I couldn't relate to this person. So, Adam Ford in Even Heroes Cry. The story behind this book is that right after the towers fell in 9/11, my husband of 2 weeks got deployed along with the 1st Marines that went into Afghanistan and took up the airport in Kandahar. Along with him went 10 of the guys that I work with daily, and it was my job to make sure there was communications. I had to help medevac guys out. Who one guy got injured in a whatever they call the stupid bombs that they used to fly in. So all of my guys that I work with came back different people. So it was interesting to me to write Adam Ford because he was the guy that I kind of made this character out of the different ways that these guys came back. They felt free in my office to discuss things and what happened over there, because they knew that one of the main rules in our office, because we did deploy to places like Afghanistan, was that whatever was discussed there was never discussed anywhere. And wives would call and ask me questions, and I would never, I'm ex-military too, so I would never share. So they felt free to share a lot of things even things I didn't really want to hear, except for my husband. He wouldn't share any of these things with me. But that was fine. I understood. So when I wrote this book, Adam has severe PTSD, and I wanted to write it as an awareness to people of what these guys go through, of the different things that you don't think day to day. Just right outside the window, when you pull on a chainsaw, that sound is very similar to machine gun fire, and just those things can trigger guys, little things like that. And so it was hard to write him because lots of times I had to watch videos. I did a little bit of research. I didn't want to really ask my guys a lot of these questions. But when several of them, including my husband, wrote it, he said it was probably the closest he's ever read to the real feelings of what these guys went through. And there were times that I broke down crying writing this book, because I'm just felt so bad for him, and the way that they are so torn down that will never be rebuilt. So that Adam Ford and Even Heroes Cry, that's the title, was the hardest character that I've ever had to write. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to choose a question here that is a little bit, because I have a lot of things that we've already answered in my question. So, this is a fun one. Tell me, is there a common thread that you find, or any link between the stories of your different genres that you notice you're either writing something the heroes have something in common, or is there a way that you link your different genres together? So let's start with Mary.
I'm glad you asked this question, because I forgot to say something about this earlier, which is that, yeah, absolutely. Even though I'm writing in genres that may seem very different, historical, Western, Victorian, and contemporary occasionally, when you pick up a book by Mary Farmer, you're going to get the same kind of story. Caroline mentioned this earlier, that we have all these discussions about diversity. I work very hard to include diverse characters in my stories, because guess what? They existed back in history. People from all over the globe in all sorts of different situations existed and had stories. It's the way that history is reported that makes us think that there were not people of color in London in the Victorian era, for example, because there were tons of them. So if you were to pick up a book from me, the common thread, whether you're reading something that's Western, Victorian, or contemporary, is the kind of personality I like to write about. I like to write steamy with a little bit of humor. In fact, I've had some reviewers lately who just didn't get that this one series I've been writing is screwball comedy. I mean, it's like over the top funny. And this would never have happened in Regency England. I'm like, well, A, yes, it probably would have, but it's not what you're used to reading. And B, yeah, people are goofy in no matter what era you're writing. So there's definitely a brand in terms of the kind of story you're going to be reading, which I think the others had mentioned too. Just that humor, that the types of characters, what they're going through, finding themselves. One thing I write about a lot, no matter what genre, is women trying to assert their independence in a system that treats women as children if they're not married. I've done a whole lot of historical research on the time period. And again, oh, that would never happen back in the historical era. Actually, yes, there's the women's rights movement didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't suddenly appear with the suffragettes. These things had been going on all along. So I guess you might argue that political element to a certain extent, but I hate using that word these days because we all know what comes to mind when you use that word political. Ugh. But that element of actual history and people struggling to have their voices heard. That's a good way to put it.
Awesome. Okay, Carolyn, is there a common thread or something that links your stories despite the genre?
I just want to say that right now I'm reading Mary's latest release, the one that came out yesterday, and it's in that series. Her series is called No, this is the Grand Tour. It's Tales from the Grand Tour. I'm sorry.
When the Wallflowers Were Wicked is the very, very, very silly Regency series, and Tales from the Grand Tour is the very, very silly set in 1890 series.
Yes. Okay. So see, but she's right. Like, and I actually highlighted about 4 paragraphs today that I was like, these are fantastic. They're funny. Okay. So going through quickly, yes, you're going to get diversity when you read a Caroline Lee book, whatever the genre, whatever the time period is. You're going to get kick-ass heroines. You're going to get heroes who work with the heroines and accept their kick-assery. I don't know how else to say that. They're not going to think it's weird that she's kick-ass, no matter what period I'm writing in. If she's not like literally kick your ass, but is still like kick-ass mentally and emotionally, he's still going to accept that, and he's going to be totally on board, and that's exactly what he's looking for in a partner. He's also going to have awesome forearms. Okay. And that is something, it started as a joke until my readers started noticing it. But I like nice forearms on a gentleman. Okay. And so now at some point in every single book, my heroine goes, I never knew forearms could be so sexy, or something along those lines. My characters tend to have really quirky conversations with one another. The series I'm doing now is the Screwball historical Scottish series, and they have all sorts of fantastic screwball conversations, quips, and back and forth like that. Because I'm kind of quirky. I'm not sure if you noticed.
I never noticed that about you.
Yes, I pulled it off.
Yeah. Sylvia, is there a common thread between the different genres that you write? If so, what are they, pray tell?
Well, my women are always, like you said, in my historical Westerns, I got criticized because my women are always kick-assery, like you say. And I was told, if you would make your women a little more demure, you might do better. And I'm like, no, that is a Sylvia McDaniel book. I don't like weak women. I want strong heroines, but I also want strong heroes. So my women on my Lipstick and Lead series, they're women bounty hunters. Who's heard of women bounty hunters? And no, they didn't have, in the Old West, there was not such a thing, because I researched it like crazy. But I had fun with that series. And then I took that series to modern day and did women bounty hunters in the modern day. And that one was a quirky, funny series. I had so much fun writing it. I'm going to go back to it, I think, maybe in the fall sometime. And then, this little paranormals that I'm doing, the women are kick-ass witches. And I do mean kick-ass. I mean, they are powerful. They are going to save the world. These 5 women together with their husbands at the time will save the world in the last book. But I'm building it up to that. And then I also try to throw in humor, because, if you don't do something silly in life, you're just not being normal. We all screw up. We all do funny things. We all say the wrong thing at the wrong time. And usually one of my heroines spouts off and says something that she shouldn't and gets in trouble. But that's what I like. And my readers seem to like it. So, hey, if we're not having fun, why do this?
Exactly. Okay, JD, tell us about that. Do you have any common threads between your different genres, and what are they?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in good company. I love to write kick-ass women. My Dragon series actually, even though they're very much like, for the most part, alpha heroes, they have a matriarchal society, so they all drink their respecting women juice every day. Like, they're like, I may be badass and strong, but we serve queens. Like, and they constantly are like they will talk about like how they serve a queen, they have an empress, like, and they don't question it. Like, that's, so that was my own little thing that was like, but I guess for me, probably the common thing is world building. That's something I get a lot of comments or reviews on, the world building. And then, yeah, I mean, like, I guess I like for my heroines to be smart. Like, a lot of times, sometimes I get annoyed when I read romance. And again, it's not, or any books really, but and you just, you're like, why are you so stupid? And I'm not saying this about any one particular book or author or anything. It just, sometimes you'll see, you're like, why would you do that? I don't care how hot he is. No, don't do that. That's stupid. Like, basic self-preservation stuff. So a lot of times, like, I've given myself a migraine trying to figure out how to make something happen without the heroine or hero having to do something incredibly stupid. So even my heroines who aren't like doctors or like, you know, intellect and book smart, I guess they tend to be smart characters and try to make wise choices in the circumstances they're in. I also very briefly flirted with setting my YA series in the same universe as my urban fantasy series, but I learned my lesson about leaving things a little too open because then you write yourself into corners. So I decided not to do it. But yeah, I guess that's my big one: world building and kick-ass smart women. So.
Okay, Peggy. Forward. Where's Peggy? Is Peggy here?
I'm here.
Okay. What is the common thread between your different genres? If there is one, what is it?
Well, there is. I come from a long line of, my husband used the word stubborn, but I use the word determined. Very smart women, unsure of themselves. So they start off at the beginning of the book really, I don't say weak, but unsure of themselves. And as the book grows, by the end, they're very strong-willed, determined to, you know, have their way. And so I think that's a thread out through all of my books. It's just they start off unsure of themselves, and then they grow to be very strong, confident, determined young women.
Very good. Well, I think it was funny because I was listening to you guys and I thought, well, you know, my women are usually pretty airy and not right on the edge of being flighty, but strong and influential to their men. And I was like, oh, okay, it probably sounds like me. But I think one of the things that I do write in all my books, and none of my different genres are linked in a way. I have considered linking my next westerns that I do write to being descendants of my Scottish medieval Scots. So, but I was looking at these two covers and I thought, whoa, this one is paranormal and this one is medieval. So I'm like, oh, they kind of look the same, don't they? So I guess I'm like, okay, swords and swords. And I write very, very alpha males that I have to pull them back a little bit so they don't come across as assholes. And not only that, but then I also, like in this book, the Hellish Highlander, which is my last release, I write about, he is like fury, anger, you know, out for revenge, and so the heroines that I write for people like him come across as like, they'll, you know, the heroine, the first time they get together, she's like, hey, you must take me, as you know, to the keep because there's a matter of life and death. And so he drives her there and makes sure she gets there and everything, and then he finds out that she just had to talk to her mom out of doing something. And he's like, how was that a matter of life and death? I'm stuck here and you told me it was a matter of life and death. And she's like, well, yeah, my life would totally change if she makes me marry some guy I don't like. So, just like things like that make the hero kind of go, okay, but it makes sense in a way. So, to see the other side of themselves. So I think that's my link. I read very, very, very alpha males. And my heroines, I wouldn't say I guess they're not as kick-assy as somebody else's, but they are strong in their way that they influence these men without coming across as whimpering or, dumb. Okay, so our time is almost up. I have a question from another reader, and it says, where's her question? Here it is. It's from Shannon Wenger, and she wants to know, for a new reader of your books, what book would you recommend to start with? So if it's a new reader, what book would you recommend they start with? Let's go to Mary.
I had to go grab a visual aid. So if you want to read my Victorian romance, I would start with December Heart, because it's the first book in what turns out to be like all of these series are connected. So that's really what starts everything for the Victorians. If you're more interested in historical Westerns, I don't have a copy of it here. I would start with His Perfect Bride, because again, that's the beginning book in what? No, actually, I take that back, because the Oregon Trail series was really the first in that whole chain of everything. And the first Oregon Trail book was Trail of Kisses, because I just thought that was such a fun title to do, Trail of Kisses, because that takes the Oregon Trail, and then those people move to the town, and then the people from the town, actually some of the people from the town then move to England. So really, I mean, you could keep going ad nauseum indefinitely, but no, really, the actual answer is December Heart.
Awesome. Okay, and Carolyn, what book should they start off to get to know you, Miss Ma'am?
Okay, I've got the series that's going on right now is called The Hots for Scots. And the first book is A Scot Mess. I'm loving it. But if you want something for free, the first in my Highland Angels series, which are my really kick-ass heroines, 3 undercover secret agents in the court of Robert the Bruce and the men who love them. The Bruce's Angel is the first book, and it's totally free on all platforms. I guess I can link it in the group. If you are into historical Westerns, I always tell people I've got a series of reimagined fairy tales set in the Old West.
How fun.
So there's 10 of them now. These are just ones I randomly grabbed. And the first book
covers.
Yes, I know. I can say that because I didn't design them. They're lovely. But like, look at that one. Look at the mermaid. Isn't that a stunning cover? Okay. The first one is called
added bonus. If you read Caroline's Everland series and you read my Brides of Paradise Ranch series, there's some crossover.
They do. So the first book in the Everland Ever After series is called Little Red, and that one is free on all platforms. And it's of course based on Little Red Riding Hood, but part of that book takes place in one of Mary's towns with Mary's character. So you could probably read Little Red and also get her introduced to her. I think that was the Paradise Ranch series that she did. But anyhow, Bruce's Angel is the freebie for the Scottish. Little Red is the freebie for.
Make sure you guys link those in the Romancing the Capital Facebook group, and if you're watching this, go over there after this, and you'll see some information from us. Okay, so who's next? Sylvia, tell us what book readers should start off with.
If you like contemporary romance, I would start off with Cupid Stupid. It's available everywhere and it's free. If you like historical Westerns, I would start off with Desperate. It's 99 cents. It's in KU. And that's my Lipstick and Lead series about the women bounty hunters. The Cupid Stupid book is about the people who dance around the Cupid statue in the middle of the town. And that's funny. Then if you want paranormal, Lovey Lloyd has Cauldron Academy as the first book. And it's where all the witches are in school learning to be witches. And it's on sale now for 99 cents. So that's my 3.
Awesome. Make sure you link them. All right. JD, where should people get to know you first?
Well, if you like Dragon Shift, I just realized my microphone's not been muted. I'm glad I wasn't talking to myself.
More than a little bit.
Yes. No, but if you like Dragon Shifters, or even if you don't, but you like fantasy, you can check out my Dragons of Azkaban series. This is the first book. It's called Wings of Stone. But if you go to my website, you can download a free prequel that I will link in the Facebook group. I'm doing the YouTuber thing, like click down below. And
like and subscribe.
Yeah, and then if you like YA, if you think something like the mix of Nancy Drew and The Sixth Sense sounds cool, you can check out a YA series. It's a Ghost Whisperer series, and the first book is called Phantom Touch. You can check it out now, but I will let you know. You'll be the first to know. I'm releasing a box set soon. So you can check out my website, and I will drop a link in the group. I'm releasing a box set at the advice of these lovely, intelligent, wise women here. This is why you need a tribe. So that's where you can find me.
Yay. Okay, Peggy, how do people get to know you?
Well, my first series, which is The Brides of the Rio Grande, takes place in Creede, Colorado, and Grace is the first book in that series. She is on KU. And then if you are interested in a lovely post-Civil War Christmas story that Hildie and Sylvia also write books in, this is called Sarah. This is my first one. There's about 20 books, so you might, they're coming out. The last batch is coming out this year, so you might check that out. It's a very inspirational, sweet read, feel-good story of hope and redemption, and so that's a good place to start there.
Okay, and awesome. Shannon, thank you for asking that question. I would ask you that if you want to read me, start off with The Heartless Laird. It's my latest series, which is the Clan Ross books. This book is on sale for 99 cents, and it is also in KU, so either way works to get you started. Also, if you sign up for my newsletter, you get a free newsletter. Free newsletter. You get a free book. And I will put the link to that in the group. Jeez. All right. So anybody have any last words? We have about just 3 minutes. So if anybody has anything they wanted to say before we sign off, of course, we will put links to our newsletters and our readers groups. Not our newsletters. I keep saying newsletters, to our readers groups in the Facebook group, so you guys can get to know us better on a daily or weekly basis. Anybody have anything to say? Add in?
He does.
I do. Okay. Can I ask a rapid fire question? If you were going to change genres into something totally different, what would you write? Like, if
everybody unmute.
All right, Carolyn, what would you write?
I would like to write British, or I'd like to write Victorian. That's I like the Victorian period. That's why I write historical westerns, and I'm not up for all of the nitpicky things though, about like what type of shoes and like what type of pencil and things.
I never would have been able to do that.
No.
All right, so British historical. Anybody else?
Women's fiction.
Oh, women's fiction.
Contemporary new adult set on Broadway.
Okay, something that.
Oh gosh.
I am writing something like that.
She made her dream come true that fast.
I think I would echo the women's fiction as well, because I have the story in my head that I've been wanting to write for probably 2 years, but I just haven't because I have other deadlines. But I would love to write this women's fiction. The story is kind of morbid. It's about this woman that's in a coma, but everything that's happening up until the point you realize she's in a coma seems real.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree.
You're going to write a woman in a coma?
She is. She's actually going to take that idea.
I'm calling it now. Guys, the women in comas is the new.
Let's all write them. It could be a theme.
We'll write a box set.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that would be so hard to read.
I know.
Love in a coma.
Every box set comes with a complimentary Xanax. Like, good Lord. Oh my gosh.
Oh, well, thank you everybody for tuning in, and just know that we are available. We are also friends and communicate. So we can't wait to
I've
see
never
what
seen
comes
this woman
out of
before
this.
in my life.
You can't
Bye,
disown us
ladies.
now.
Bye,
Thank you
everybody.
so much, everybody.
Bye, friends.
Thank
Bye.
you for hosting us.